Hello, everyone. My name is Patricia Vieira. I'm a researcher at the Center for Social Studies of the University of Coimbra, and I'm also a professor of Spanish and Portuguese at Georgetown University. The title of my presentation is Plants as Environmental Activists, Amazonian Vegetal Expression in Franz Krashberg's Sculptures. My presentation is divided into three parts, and the first is Franz Krashberg's Amazonian art. Brazilian artist Franz Krashberg says in a documentary about his work, titled Krashberg, the Poet of Traces, that over the course of his creative development, he found, and I quote, that he can work with it, with nature, not be afraid of it, participate with it, end of quote. His goal was to collaborate with the natural world, or as the voiceover in the documentary puts it, and I quote, for the first time, an artist was working in co-authorship with nature, end of quote. Plants are central to Krashberg's artistic praxis. While he used materials borrowed from nature for most of his career, I will focus here on his work from the 1980s onwards, when he began to employ charred tree trunks he collected in the aftermath of the devastating forest fires that destroyed Brazil's old-growth tropical forests to make his sculptures. In the face of the massive devastation of rainforests, Krashberg sought to express the plants' indignation for their pervasive mistreatment at the hands of humans. In his artworks, Krashberg links art and environmental activism. And he says in an interview, I want to show the destruction, my revulsion at the destruction of the natural world, and at the same time to make my art. His charred wood sculptures occupy a zone of indistinction between aesthetics and political denunciation, and he openly acknowledges, and I quote, that my goal is not to make sculptures, my goal is to lend a shape to my screen, end of quote. I argue that Krashberg's incinerated wood pieces blur not only between art and activism, but also between the artist and his object, between human and non-human works. His art is the result of this ongoing sensorial but also intellectual exchange with plants. The sculptures made of burned tree trunks are as much Krashberg's artworks as they are the statements of the plants themselves, who express their suffering by exposing their dead bodies. They become the sculpture's partners and co-authors, human and plant creators, united by the common aim of condemning environmental disasters through. And here you can see an example of one of these charred wood sculptures that Krashberg made. So devoid of the means to voice their plight, plants signify through their corporeal presence their physical selves, incarnating their message. Plants are Krashberg's allies in the denunciation of deforestation, and like him, they are both artists and activists who put their bodies on the line in the fight for the environment. My understanding of calcinated trees as artists and activists should be understood literally, and not as a metaphor. Plants are art and activism, since for them, even more than for Krashberg, what is at stake is their own lives, that is to say, the possibility to continue to thrive in the face of the existential threat posed by fire. Plants contribute to the environmental cause, and are activists the only way they can, by showing rather than by saying. Through their incinerated tree trunks turned into sculptures, trees stand up for themselves and reveal the predicament of flora in Brazil, which unfortunately mirrors the situation of primary forests throughout much of the world. But the question is, can non-human beings, including plants, animals, and even non-living forms of existence, signify? Are they capable of signification? What is the meaning of matter? And how does it impact us humans? In the rest of this talk, I analyze Krashberg's wooden sculptures as an instantiation of plant art and activism. I discuss possible theoretical frameworks for understanding plant wood expression, including new materialism and Amazonian thought, and I end with a more detailed analysis of a human plant sculpture made with calcinated wood salvaged from forest fires in Amazonia. To the second section, New Materialism and Amazonian Thought. New materialism has developed in the past couple of decades as a theoretical framework that allows us to consider the agential capacity of non-humans and even of non-living beings. As Jean Bennett succinctly puts it, the aim of new materialism, and I quote, is to detach materiality from the figures of passive, mechanistic, or divinely infused substance. New materialism highlights the co-imbrication of matter and meaning, at the same time as it espouses a non-hierarchical view of the multiple forms of existence. It recognizes that different entities have diverse ways of expressing themselves, but shuns the anthropocentric bias of considering human modes of articulation to be inherently superior to those of other beings. For new materialist thinkers, matter is capable of semiosis, and the whole world is a material semiotic reality. As a consequence, matter has a mind of its own, or in other words, it has agency, which, therefore, this is a quote, is not to be necessarily and exclusively associated with human beings and with human intentionality, but is a pervasive and inbuilt property of matter, as part and parcel of its generative dynamism. In a nutshell, matter matters and means quite a lot more than we used to give it credit for. A counterpoint to new materialism's views on the vitality of matter can be found in indigenous, peasant, and riverine Amazonian thought that foregrounds the agency of non-human beings and their impact on human lives. Native Amazonian communities consider not only fauna and flora, but also, for instance, rivers or mountains, as subjects capable of intentionality and social agency. Such entities are akin to what anthropologist Marisol de la Cadena has designated in the context of Andean culture as earth beings, that is to say, salient forms of existence from the landscape, or in the case of Amazonia, also animals and plants, with whom humans negotiate key aspects of their ongoing commerce with their surroundings. Anthropological studies show that the epistemologies of Amazonian communities see separations between different entities as fluid, and cross-species metamorphoses that overcome the boundaries dividing humans and non-humans are a frequent trope of Amazonian cultural productions. Such transformations presuppose that non-human beings have an outlook of their own, which they relinquish to adopt another non-human or human standpoints, or conversely, that humans can learn to see the world through a non-human perspective. Rivers, for instance, are frequently considered to be snakes that, once angered, need to be appeased, lest humans want to suffer their wrath. Interspecies relations are common, an example being the widespread belief throughout the region that river dolphins seduce young women, often by assuming the shape of men. Eduardo Cohen shows that for some Amazonian communities, forests have their modes of thought, and they enter into dialogic exchanges with humans. Speaking trees, who ponder upon human-plant relations and bemoan the exploitation of flora, are a feature of several classical Latin American novels about the Amazon, including José Eustácio Rivera's The Vortex and Rómulo Gallego's Canaima. The constant exchanges between different entities and the metamorphosis of various forms of being into one another in Amazonian thought echo new materialist arguments about the flux of matter, which congeals into specific, meaningful configurations only momentarily as part of the ongoing performance of the world. Anthropologist Eduardo Vieira has theorized the recurrent metamorphoses in Amazonian cultures as part of a worldview he calls perspectivism. He defines this term as, and I quote, a conception according to which the world is inhabited by different sorts of subjects or persons, human and non-human, which apprehend reality from distinct points of view. For Amazonian communities, and this is another quote, animals, and I would add plants, are people or see themselves as persons, a notion associated with the idea that, again quote, the manifest form of each species is a mere envelope, a clothing, which conceals an internal human form, end of quote. Amazonian culture is therefore, according to Castro, unabashedly anthropomorphic in its belief in the shared spiritual essence of humans and non-humans, divided only by their distinct physical traits. Amazonian anthropomorphism is grounded on the notion that humans and non-humans are equally able to create meaning and culture. Rather than erasing non-human life by willfully superimposing human features upon it, Amazonian communities believe non-human and human beings possess similar spiritual attributes. The anthropomorphism of Amazonian peoples chimes in with recent debates in the environmental humanities on anthropomorphism as a way to underline the connections between humans and other forms of existence. As Bennett points out, and I quote, in revealing similarities across categorical divides and lighting up structural parallels between material forms in nature and those in culture, anthropomorphism can reveal isomorphisms. In the same vein, Friedrich Carlson argues for critical anthropomorphism as a means to move away from a mechanistic view of non-humans and to highlight the very real analogies between humans and other beings. In the context of plant writing, John Ryan has similarly advocated for anthropomorphism, and I quote, to prompt readers to care more about vegetal others, end of quote. Like humans, animals and plants are seen as beings who respond intelligently to their surroundings in the Amazon, and who have their own knowledge and sociality, which through close contact becomes entangled in human social life. The cultural common ground of both humans and non-humans allows the transformation of ones into the others and the concomitant adoption of each other's point of view. The world is shaped by the conjunction of perspectives originating in different beings who are engaged in constant connections and dialogue. For Amazonian peoples, shamanism designates the ability of some humans to adopt the perspective and ways of thinking of non-humans. I would argue that cultural productions about Amazonian plants and animals can be regarded as a form of shamanism, in that they inscribe non-human modes of existence in human cultural life. But we might also envision plants and animals as shamans who metamorphose into humans, embrace their various cultural ways of cultural expression, and for instance, in the case of Amazonian mind-altering plants, like ayahuasca or yopo, these plants also determine human thoughts and actions. And to section 3, Amazonian plant art. And I would like to examine here with you today Krasberg's sculpture Homage to Chico Mendes as an example of the metamorphosis of matter and of different beings into one another, that is a hallmark both of new materialism and also mutatis mutandis of Amazonian thought. The title of this piece refers to Robert Apert, an Amazonian trade union leader and environmental activist. Mendes was assassinated by the son of a landowner in the Brazilian state of Acre because of his efforts to protect local land from deforestation through the creation of a so-called extractivist reserve in the area. And in these extractivist reserves, only traditional and sustainable extractivist activities are allowed, such as fishing, hunting, or rubber tapping. Standing alone on the ground floor of Rio de Janeiro's Museum of Modern Art, this sculpture set the tone for Krasberg's exhibition in that museum as both an artistic tribute to Amazonian flora and also to the activists who struggled to defend it, and as an indictment of agribusiness-led rainforest destruction. Made with the incinerated trunk of an Amazonian tree recovered after a forest fire, the sculpture embodies a series of metamorphoses as well as transmutations of meaning that reveal the instability of human, non-human, and organismic material dualisms. Plants, who are capable of turning inorganic substances into organic life through photosynthesis, were transformed into charred wood through forest fires. That incinerated wood, in turn, enters into a collaborative exchange with the sculpture to become a work of art. Subsequently, that work of art is interpreted by viewers in an infinite change of transmutations and resignifications. The wood of a dead tree, that is to say, plant life turned into matter, refers to another death, that of Robert Apert Chico Mendes. The sculpture points to the intricate ties binding plant and human bodies both in life and in death. Such a connection between the devastation of rainforests and the tragedies of human history were often underscored by Krasberg himself. A Polish Jew who survived the Holocaust, where he lost his entire family, Krasberg regarded the devastation of nature as a repetition of the horrors he witnessed during the Second World War. And he says in an interview, "The first time I wept after the war was in the Brazilian state of Acre when I saw all that destruction. I could no longer tolerate man's barbarity once I found nature." End of quote. For Krasberg, the assassination of Mendes goes hand in hand with the murder of the trees themselves, who are relentlessly killed because of human greed. The striations carved into the wood of the sculpture stand for the activity of rubber tappers, who make small incisions in the bark of rubber trees to collect their sap. But the red pigmentation embedded in those striations is a clear reference to blood, the blood of all war victims the artist saw in his youth, the blood of murdered activist Chico Mendes, the blood of murdered activist Chico Mendes, the symbolic blood of the charred tree whose death made that particular artwork possible, and the metaphorical blood of all other Amazonian plants destroyed in forest fires. The powerful impression the sculpture leaves upon viewers results from the encounter between Krasberg's artistic skill and the form of plant-turned artwork that articulates Flora's suffering through the display of its mutilated body. Human, plant, and wood join efforts that coalesce in an artistic and activist statement against the gratuitous annihilation of rainforests in the Amazon and throughout the world. Thank you very much for your attention.